Hello everyone and welcome to Asteri Sofia Kairos. We've got a new interesting series for you. This is an evergreen series. We're going to be focusing on the transits, which is the movement of the planets through the signs, how they connect with other planets, how they connect with the signs and their rulers. So we hope that this will be of interest to you, and it's going to be a series that you can return to time and time again, unlike our weekly offerings, which are of the moment. So this is offering you a roadmap and teaching you how to interpret the transits. So today I'm going to be looking at Neptune in Aries. If you're following astrology at all, you will have heard of this. This is a transit, which is a movement of Neptune going from Pisces into Aries. 2026 has been a year that was highlighted right back in 2021 when I first joined my very first beginners astrology online self-paced course. Now, an important disclaimer here. I still regard myself as a student of astrology. I have been studying. I'm into my 5th year now of studying. And I remember when I was first picking up astrology, hearing that until you've done your first 5 years, you know nothing. It's such an ongoing process. And I'm only now beginning to understand what they meant by this. I'm still learning and experiencing. And I think you have to experience some of these outer planet movements to really get what they mean for us in our bodies, in our lived experiences. So as a disclaimer, all I know of Neptune in Aries is what happened last year for that brief period from the spring through to October, when Neptune had its first ingress into Aries. It was just a taster, it just dipped its toe in. But this year, it's actually going to move for good for our lifetimes. And Neptune transits for 165 years around the zodiac. So for our lifetimes, we're only going to experience Neptune in a few signs. It spends 14 years in each sign. So it's kind of like a buckle up moment. This is a big collective shift that we're all experiencing. It hits all of our charts differently because we've all got Aries in a different place in our charts, different places that we're going to experience it, whether it's angular and very loud for you, or whether it's succeedant or cadent. The kind of work that it's going to be doing for us is different for each and every individual, and also where the ruler Mars is located for us, and the exalted ruler, the sun. It's going to matter, and it's going to make a difference for all of us as to how we experience it, and also how those planets are moving and expressing. So join me as I attempt to guide you through this, but please understand that I'm coming at this with a student's eye and a student's perspective. So I'll do my best to share what I've learned and what I know. So on the 26th of January, Neptune's going to move into Aries, and this is a spiritual reset for us. And this is going to be colored by the 20th of February, when the collective clock will reset to 0. And that's because Saturn and Neptune will meet at 0 Aries. That's the very first degree of the zodiac. And astrologers call this a world point because when the outer planets cross this world point, this 0 Aries, the story shifts for everyone. This marks the end of a roughly 35-year Saturn-Neptune cycle, and it also opens this brand new 14-year spiritual revolution of the self, as Neptune is traveling through Aries until roughly 2039. And it will do the same thing. It will have a first ingress, it will retrograde back, and then it will move permanently into Taurus. So aside from this brief preview that we had in 2025, this is the first Neptune in Aries transit that any of us living will ever experience. And I've been looking back at this time. It was 1862 to 1874. when Neptune was last in Aries. I've been looking at the music of that time, the experiences, the American Civil War very much colored it, and seeing what that time has to tell us. But obviously we're living in a very different age. We've got very different lifestyles to the technology that they had then. So it will be a very different experience for us. So we can't take everything from then and transpose it onto now. This will be the first page in a new chapter of how we experience Aries itself. Aries is personified by the archetype I am. It's all about that first spark of the individual experiencing who they actually are. But there's also a specific moment in the early 2030s when the choices that we make under this ingress are tested. We'll come back to that 2033, 2034 collision point later, and I'll be touching on all of these significant points through the transit as we move through this recording. So Saturn as an archetype is bringing reality, time, maturity, and commitment. Neptune brings vision, imagination, and the longing to transcend. And at this 0 point of Aries, these two principles are fusing in the very most personal place possible. Our sense of identity. Over the next 14 years, the question will change from what is happening in the world to who am I inside of all of this and what am I willing to live for? Now I ask you to bring this down into your body for a moment. I'm recording this as Neptune is spending its last few hours in Pisces. And Neptune was actually discovered in 1846 when it was in Pisces. So we're also experiencing a return of Neptune in Pisces, and we're about to leave all of that behind. So think about how the last decade has actually felt in your nervous system. For some of us, it might have felt like a long, strange dream. The lines between truth and illusion have been blurred. We've seen truth emerge as a concept, as something that different people can have different truths. The real truth has become something that can be debated rather than a fact. People have their own facts now. We've watched conspiracy and confusion spread. A lie can travel around the world before the truth has put its boots on. Spiritually, you might have felt wide open, porous, overwhelmed at the same time. And that's part of the signature of Neptune in Pisces. It's beautiful. It's oceanic, it's boundless, but it's also disorientating for us humans. We have limits. We can be easily overwhelmed. And from now in January 2026, that tide begins to turn. Neptune leaves Pisces and begins to commit to Aries, to this martial place. The dissolving, drifting quality of the last 14 years is giving way to something sharper and more immediate. Aries is cardinal, fire. It initiates, and fire inspires, and it carries the clear, simple impulse to begin something. Where Pisces has asked us to surrender, Aries asks you to stand up and say, who am I? So this video is your map for that journey. We're going to look at the larger cycle that we're standing inside, what Neptune in Aries actually means, how it lands differently for the 3 different sign modalities, and how you can work with this transit consciously rather than drifting through it as we might have done through Pisces. My aim now is to give you grounded, non-fear-based guidance so that you can participate in this reset as an active creator of your own life. And I'm going to bring up the chart of this moment of the ingress. So here is Neptune in Aries, just cross that line. And what I'm going to show you as we move through is the decans and the bounds as well, because that's going to inform what Neptune is seeking. Neptune as ingress is in the decan of Mars, and Mars will be the storyteller of this movement of Neptune through the first third of Aries. So the decans are a division of each sign into 3, and they tell the story of this transit. And then Jupiter is the bound ruler, and the bound ruler can bring the resources. They can say the tools that Neptune is going to be working with. Jupiter, we find in Cancer, in an exalted position, but retrograde. So Jupiter is able to see Neptune by square, but it's retrograde. So there's setbacks and delays in Jupiter getting these resources to Neptune. However, Jupiter is exalted. It has a great position, and obviously when it stations, we may see a shift in Neptune's ability to bring these Cancerian ideals, so the watery ideals that Neptune's very familiar and comfortable with, and the Jupiterian ideals of belief, justice, wisdom, the law, all of that into what Neptune is trying to achieve in this first fraction of its time. And you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different bounds. So we've got Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and then Saturn. And you may notice that Mars and Saturn, as we look at all the bounds of all the signs, Mars and Saturn rule the last bounds of every sign. And that's why those last degrees of every sign can be regarded as a bit more difficult. They're more challenging. They're finishing up with the work that the planet has to do in that sign. And that's why they can be that little bit more difficult. To understand why this moment is so charged, we need to place it in its longer story. Every 35 to 36 years, Saturn and Neptune come together in the sky. Each time this meeting coincides with a particular kind of collapse that we see in our world, and a particular kind of dream, a collective dream that tends to dissolve. So both the structures that no longer hold tend to dissolve, and a new ideal begins to take shape. So the last time Saturn and Neptune met was in 1989 in the sign of Capricorn. And collectively, we might recognize that year as the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was the unraveling of the Eastern Bloc and the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. Capricorn is associated with government's hierarchy, its institutions, and long-standing, old, mature institutions at that. And under that conjunction, systems that had seemed immobile for decades suddenly crumbled. So if we hold that image of the Berlin Wall and the people gathered singing, graffitiing, and the cracks appearing, stone and concrete giving way under the human hands that were literally tearing it apart. That's etched into my memory. I know that was a really significant time. That is what a Saturn-Neptune conjunction does. It shows you the wall that can no longer hold any longer. What is dissolving? This collective dream that was held, that we've realized it's like the Emperor in the Wizard of Oz, that curtain being pulled back, and it was a collective dream, but it wasn't totally true. It didn't hold water when it was tested. And what happens then when it breaks? What can we build that's actually built on a solid foundation? So on a personal level, many people born around that time carry this deep sensitivity to whether authority is truthful or corrupt. If you grew up in the shadow of those years, you may have always felt that outer structures were unreliable. And that's maybe what that Saturn-Neptune in Capricorn can tell us, the reality of power meeting the fog of disillusionment. So let's look back at that conjunction. And we see here Saturn and Neptune conjunct in Capricorn. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, so he's empowered, but we also see Uranus was there, making that sudden change as well. And Neptune and Venus there as well, all co-present. Venus connecting people. We also see that there was a wide whole sign sextile to Pluto in Scorpio. Mars was at home in its domicile in Scorpio. The Sun and Mercury. Mercury was just emerging but still combust. So messages may have been confusing at that time. So we come back to right now. So if we think back, Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011. During that time, we've seen a huge global wave of compassion and connection. We've seen watery events when Neptune and Saturn were getting close, when Saturn was changing direction in Pisces. We've also seen huge rises in escapism, addiction, and misinformation. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, the 12th sign. It gathers everything, it dissolves it, and it prepares the ground ready for a new beginning. It's also seen as the dying of the light, symbolically. If Aries is the first sign where the light has won from the winter, the last 6 signs of the zodiac are the winter months, where we're in wintry months of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. Then the first 6 signs are the summer months, where the light is winning, the light takes over. There's more light in our days than there is darkness. And Aries is the first sign where the light has been wrested from the dark and takes over the baton. And we've got to decide what to do with that light. It's like you've won, but you're reassembling your troops, you're reassessing your losses. What has it cost? So that new beginning starts when Neptune crosses into Aries, and that first aspect really informs the whole of the next 14 years when it joins Saturn at 0 degrees on the 20th of February. It's cardinal fire. Cardinal signs initiate something, and quite often the end result isn't what it first initiates. It's raw life force, particularly in Aries. That's the first spark. It's fire. Burns, and then it burns itself out. It burns brightly and strong. It's the impulse to begin, the clear, simple statement that I exist, I'm here. What am I going to do? And it's pioneering. I heard Gary Caton once say, Aries finds the hard edges that set the boundaries for the rest of us. It will go right up to those edges and then no further. It doesn't want to go over those edges. It will always know where the hard edges are. And Aries will start something without knowing exactly where it's going. Other signs might plan all the way through, right up to the end. But Aries will always want to start just because it's got an idea, and it will allow it to grow and adjust as it goes. It doesn't mind starting without the clear plan. In fact, that's what it does. It starts and lets it grow, brings people in, allows it to grow and become its own thing. And I always say, stay unattached to outcome with Aries. It's not got a clear plan, so therefore it can't get fixated with it must be this. It's not bridezilla energy of the day has to go like this. It's like, well, we start like that, but if other people bring in great ideas, then great, we'll go with that. It allows it to become its own thing. So Aries is just always moving ahead. And the spiritual figure that Neptune offers us isn't the martyr that it was in Pisces that's quietly sacrificing itself at the edge or dissolving into the ocean. Here, it becomes a spiritual warrior, the person who's prepared to act on what they feel is sacred. And Saturn's presence throughout 2026 and its close movement with Neptune makes that even more important, because Saturn's a planet of structure, boundaries, and consequences. So with this conjunction, Saturn moves into Aries, where it's traditionally in its full. And that means that Saturn can no longer operate in its usual slow, methodical way. Aries wants to move fast. It's like Saturn is a grandfather and Aries is the youth who's ready to try everything, move fast with the times. It's got new, fresh ideas that it wants to try everything out. It's the youth who knows everything. And Saturn is a wise elder who's tried things but knows what works for them and isn't wanting to just try and fail. So we've got some tension now. Neptune is infusing this will with vision. Neptune is the visionary, and Saturn is trying to shape that will. And Aries is a sign that's ruling them both. They both have to operate. If you like, Aries is the temple that they're both within, and they both have to operate within the rules and the facilities of that temple. Aries is impatient. So this mix might express in several ways. On the one hand, there's great potential to turn a long-held dream into something very real. Saturn can give Neptune the form to allow something to become a practice, a commitment, to give it a concrete new identity. Saturn can crystallize things into reality. And on the other hand, this urge to move quickly can lead people to build new structures, but only on half-healed foundations. The true work that needs to be done to heal the old wounds hasn't been done well enough or fully enough, and the old ill feeling might fester, and that can rise up again. Or the foundations haven't been built deeply enough, so the structure may crumble. Decisions made in haste may need revision later, so we might need to expect that. And that's particularly in the later years, 2033 to 2034, when Saturn reaches Cancer and will square Aries. And that will be a first adjustment, particularly of what's seeded now in this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Mars is also especially crucial and important here because Mars rules Aries. Whenever a planet is in Aries, it is hosted by Mars. So if we imagine this temple, this is Mars's domicile. Mars rules here, and Neptune's fiery visionary current that it's unfamiliar with, this is a planet that's comfortable with water. When I searched for pictures, all I mainly found was firefighters, fire being fought by water. Those are when they normally meet. So again, it's a battleground. It's a conflict of fire being tamed by water. So it's hard to find a positive image of fire and water meeting. But we can think of steam and the way that that can be captured in a visionary way, and the way that it was used as to power things forward, as a positive way to use the energy of Neptune and Mars together. So Mars itself moves in a roughly 2-year cycle around the zodiac. And each time it changes signs, we're going to experience a little shift of the tone of the courage that Mars is bringing. And the way that Neptune is expressing will shift a little bit. When Neptune first enters Aries, we've got Mars in a nice sextile. But Mars will leave Aquarius, where it is currently, and move into Pisces. And it won't then be able to see or support Neptune. So we might see a shift then. And following that, Mars will be in Aries. It will be better able to support. It will be dignified. So we might see a better expression of Neptune as well then. Equally, when Mars is in Taurus, it might get more difficult. When Mars reaches Gemini, it will be mutable. It might not mix as well, but at least there'll be sight again from a sextile. And again, when Mars reaches Cancer, Mars will be struggling there. It will be in its full, but it will be squaring. So again, it will be a more difficult relationship, but at least it will have that line of sight again. So we'll see that Mars's movement around the zodiac will bring Neptune shifts and drifts in its fortune. We've been used to a time where Neptune was in Pisces, where its ruler Jupiter had a slightly slower move around the zodiac. Jupiter moves in a 12-year cycle, so it shifts from sign to sign much slower. So we're going to have to get used to a faster moving planet ruling Neptune now. Across these 14 years that Neptune is in Aries, Mars will be recoloring how Neptune's going to feel on the ground for us. So as I said at first, for the ingress, which colors the whole of the transit, Mars is in Aquarius. This is a Saturn-ruled air sign associated with collectives, technology, and the future. So that is what's giving this spiritual warrior energy a very particular flavor, coloring the ingress, coloring the whole of the transit, informing it. When we look back, we will look at this ingress chart to see where all the planets were and what was informing it. And of course, Mars is also the Decan ruler as well, bringing us the story of the transit. So it's bringing action that's original and innovative and future focused. It's also conscious of systems and how they affect communities. Choices made now are not just for the personal, for the I am, but they're also plugging into the movements, the networks, shared spaces in Aquarius that we might see ripple out over the first 2 years of this long cycle, but also inform as Neptune moves through the later decans and bounds. This 14-year period where the new global dream is coloured by Aries themes of courage, anger, assertion, individuality, and beginning again. This Saturn-Neptune conjunction will act like the ignition key, the starting gun. It will set the pattern for how those years will unfold. So this is like the hinge moment. These cardinal points, these ingress points, are hinge or pivot points in our charts where things can shift and change. They're points that we look to, especially when the outer planets move over them. Structures that were questioned in 1989 may return for a review. The fog and overwhelm of the Neptune in Pisces years, all of that leads us to now, to this invitation to reimagine who we are and how we move through the world. So let's look at the archetype of the spiritual warrior and the ingredients of this transit. Neptune is known as the great dissolver. It erodes these hard edges and fixed forms. Water is known as one of the hardest elements because over time it erodes away rock, in a way that fire and earth and air simply cannot. It represents longing, imagination, and the urge to slip beyond ordinary reality. Psychologically, Neptune describes porousness, places where we absorb more than we realize, where compassion, mysticism, inspiration, confusion, escapism can all mingle. Imagine like our wildest dreams, where just mad or crazy things can happen. Whenever Neptune is active, these veils will be thin. You can feel more, and yet, even if you can't name what you're sensing, and I'm reminded that our other senses are also included. I attended an Empress Atlantis workshop, and she reminded us that things like our hearing and things like that are also porous, and they can be affected by a Neptune transit if it affects our individual charts. Aries is cardinal fire. It belongs to Mars. It's ruled by Mars and carries this I am impulse. Aries is a spark of life force. It wants to move, to act, and to begin something. It's direct. It can act instinctively. And it's also honest and authentic, as the way most of the fire signs are. But this is in a very unvarnished way, a youthful way. At its best, Aries shows up as courage, initiative, and simple, unfiltered presence. Here I am. This is me. Take me as I am. I'm willing to take the first step. When Neptune enters Aries, these two currents run together. There's a longing for the divine that no longer wants to stay in the abstract. It wants to live through a body. It wants a life on this earth. Spirituality stops being about merging in the imaginal and those realms of longing. It becomes about the question, how does the sacred move through you in real time? And this is the root of the spiritual warrior archetype. Neptune in Aries, it's about living close to your own inner truth as you can. Even when that truth is telling you to change course, listen to it. The spiritual warrior is less concerned about perfection and performance. It's more about alignment, about that authenticity. Fire is very much concerned with the truth and honesty and alignment. Noticing where your life, your work, your relationships are out of step with what you feel to be true in your heart. The fire of your heart, again, we see the sun is exalted here. And the sun, as we know with Leos, it's very much true to yourself. You become willing to make changes, even if they're disruptive, to close that gap between what is right and true for you. With Neptune in Aries, you might feel this growing as an intolerance for where you betray yourself. You might have been living with patterns to keep the peace or to make others around you feel more comfortable, and they might now start to feel unbearable. The roles you played, the identities that you wore just to belong, to fit in with the crowd, versions of you that you might have outgrown years ago, but they really begin to itch now and dissolve, sometimes gently and other times with a jolt. And because we see Mars as the ruler, Mars is the planet of action, of cutting things away, of severing, of taking a stand, of acting with courage, you'll be brought back again and again, most likely, to the question, if I really believed what I say I believe, what would I actually do? And asking if your actions are aligning with your words. So this brings us to the shadow side. And the shadow side is like the things that we prefer not to talk about or not to admit, the things that we're not proud of, but are true because we're human. There is light and darkness. There is shade and light. There is always that yin and yang. And this is that Neptune in Aries might romanticize anger and conflict in the way that we see in violent movies, maybe, or programs on screen where violence comes with a great soundtrack over it and things are blurred slightly to make them less distressing. It can lead people to confuse personal will with sacred guidance or to project spiritual language over human ego desires. So it can be more difficult to separate those out. It can make a cause feel like it's sacred and holy when it's really just about being right or about being first. I want to be the first at this. And if you catch yourself needing to feel that, ask yourself, is this a shadow manifestation? And this is why I talk about Mars's condition and how it matters. Because during this conjunction in February of Neptune and Saturn, Mars will be in Aquarius answering to Saturn. Let's go ahead to that conjunction. So we see that conjunction in the first decan, in the band of Jupiter. And we see Mars there at the end of Aquarius. It's in the decan of the moon. So it's concerned with our collective feelings. And we find the moon is there in Aries. It's also in the decan of Mars. So there's a lot of Mars energy. So this ties the archetype of the spiritual warrior to responsibility to the group, to future generations, to the impact of our choices. It reminds us that our actions are not happening in a vacuum. Your courage is your own, but it also ripples through networks that you can't see. Across these years, the 14 years that Neptune will transit, the collective will be learning the difference between impulsive reactions and spiritually informed reaction. Each of us will be invited to cultivate a form of courage that comes from listening deeply and then moving. Do you see Saturn's influence? Even when the path is not fully mapped out, and that's Mars. The spiritual warrior does feel fear, confusion, and doubt, but it still chooses to live as close to their inner truth as they can. It's kind of feel the fear and do it anyway. That's kind of the motto of Aries. Under Neptune in Aries, that becomes a long practice rather than a single dramatic moment, showing up again and again as who you really are. So our next part is looking at the decans and the bounds, just zooming in a little bit on how this transit unfolds. This isn't one flat field that's all fire. There's texture as we move through the decans, these 3 10-degree slices of the sign, and then the bounds or terms, which are smaller divisions ruled by these different planets. So the decans tell the story of Neptune that it's living through in each of this part of Aries. And then the bounds describe the resources and tools that Neptune has to work with while it's living in that chapter. You might think of it as a series of rooms that Neptune will walk through while it's in its temple for the 14 years that it's staying in Aries. Each decan is a different room or a different wing, maybe, with its own storyline. And within that room or wing, the bounds will tell you what's in the cupboards, what resources are there. With Jupiter, we see faith, desire, maybe with Mercury, language, and with Mars, courage, Saturn, discipline. These are the ingredients that Neptune can draw on to express that chapter of the story. So as you see from this chart, the first decan is Mars, raw initiative, the clean strike of I am and I will, pure Aries. That's needed to get this spark of the zodiac initiated. It's about beginning. As Neptune moves through this early stretch, the spiritual warrior energy feels very close to the classic Aries spark. First steps, experiments, beginnings, the emphasis on the courage to move at all. Many of the strongest awakenings around identity happen here. You may not know yet where you're going, but you know you can't stay where you are. The second decan, the sun. Here, the Aries heat ripens into something much more conscious. The storyline shifts from what are you beginning to what kind of person are you becoming as you take these actions. Neptune in this decan highlights leadership, visibility, integrity. The spiritual warrior work becomes less about a single act of bravery, more about living in a way that your inner light and your outer actions are matching. This is where questions of example, responsibility, and your creative mastery come to the front. Then 2035, Neptune moves into Venus's decan. This is where Aries learns about relationships, aesthetics, and the give and take of desire. Venus wants to connect. And as Neptune passes through this decan towards the end of the transit, the focus will tilt towards how your individuality weaves and matches with others. You may find yourself refining how you love, how you collaborate, how you express beauty or pleasure. The warrior is asking less about what do you want and more about how can you serve connection and harmony without disappearing. So underneath these larger chapters, the Egyptian bounds give even finer shading. In Aries, the bounds are ruled, as you see, by Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and then Saturn. Each bound offers this different resource kit that Neptune can reach for while living out the Mars, Sun, or Venus decan story. So early on, we'll experience Neptune moving through Jupiter's bound in the first decan. This Mars-ruled story of raw initiative is supplied with Jupiter's tools, faith, meaning, a sense that life is so much bigger than just this moment. This is the phrase we're saying yes, feels supported by a quieter inner belief that there will be a path, even if you can't see it yet. This might look like a risk that only makes sense because something inside you deeply, deeply trusts it. And then still in the first decan, I'll move ahead so you can see it. Then still in the first decan, Neptune enters Venus's back around 2028. Story is still about beginning, but the resource here is about attraction, pleasure, desire. You start to feel which new directions are actually nourishing you instead of pushing yourself towards purely form and will. You might notice, where does my energy soften and open? What feels beautiful or kind to my system? That Venusian feedback will become a tool for choosing which beginnings to keep feeding. And then Neptune crosses into the second decan at 10 degrees, the sun's story of conscious selfhood. It will still be in Venus's bound. While there, it will move into Mercury's bound. Now the decan story is about becoming visible and coherent. As it moves into Mercury's bound, 2030s, Mercury will add language, curiosity, messaging, and daily choices of our thoughts and communication to the available tools. You may feel pulled to study, to journal, to change how you speak about yourself here, crafting a new narrative, maybe how you introduce yourself, your email sign-off, how you name your work, how you tell your own story are some of the ways that Neptune in Aries might show up now. And later in the second decan, Neptune will reach Mars's own bound. So the sun's story of integrity and example is now getting stopped with Mars's knives and sharp instruments, swords, the capacity to cut away, to act decisively, to defend what you have been discovering about who you are. This is where some of the bolder course corrections tend to happen. You may find that you no longer can soft talk certain truths. The resources that you have is the courage to follow through. And then finally, towards the end of Aries, Neptune moves into the third decan, Venus's relational story, and finishes out the Mars bound before it moves into Saturn's bound. And here the focus is on weaving your own individuality with others. The resource kit is Saturn's limits, time, maturity, commitment, reality checks. Neptune's vision of love, beauty, and harmony is meeting structures that can't be bypassed now. This is sobering, but in the best kind of way. You can see more clearly what kind of relationships, collaborations, and creative patterns are sustainable for you and which are not. The spiritual warrior energy here is quieter, it's grown up, it's more seasoned, less about proving yourself to others and more about staying true to what you have learned during these 14 years, even if it's inconvenient or slow. And you don't have to track every degree to work with this. Just remember the story of how it progresses and moves. And remember that Neptune in Aries is not just one single mood. It's matured, it's got nuance. These decans carry the arc from this raw initiative of Mars through this conscious selfhood of the Sun into this relational and aesthetic refinement of Venus. The bounds are describing the phases of faith of Jupiter and attraction of Venus, thought and language of Mercury, sharp action of Mars, and consequence and commitment of Saturn that support that arc. If you find yourself meeting this transit differently in 5 or 10 years than you do in 2026, that's exactly right. You're going to be exactly where you're meant to be. You are going to be moving through this transit, this territory in layers. And that's exactly why we're offering this roadmap for you. So this story and the resources are evolving as you grow. Transits are like a spiral, and so are our lives. We learn as we grow. We add experiences to our memory and our toolkit as well. We never act the same as we do when we're younger. So let's look at some guidance for the cardinal signs. The cardinal signs, this is going to be particularly intense. And the cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. So here we see this in the chart, Aries, Cancer, Libra here, and Capricorn. And that's because these are the signs that begin the seasons. They begin the spring, the summer, autumn, and winter in the Northern Hemisphere. It's reversed in the South. So they start things, they initiate. They're the architects of the zodiac, the hinges or the pivot points. And Neptune in Aries is reworking this for us at a very deep level. So there's one technical piece to keep in mind before we look at each sign. Neptune is in Aries now until 2039. Mars is, as we've discussed, hosting that for the entire stay. And Mars will be cycling through all of these 12 signs every 2 years. So we know it will make several rotations. In 2027, Mars will be retrograding from Virgo back into Leo. So the Mars retrogrades are going to be a significant time to watch and track for our Neptune in Aries delineations. Each time Mars stations, changes signs, or slows down like this, the tone of the spiritual warrior energy is going to shift on the ground for us. So it begins with Mars in Aquarius, this first ingress, this first burst of energy. So we know it's already colored by questions about community, the future, and how our courage is going to play out in collective spaces. Mars is ruling Aries, and Mars is also exalted in Capricorn, so it's got a lot to say on the cardinal matters. So this will be challenging your personal reinvention into action that can influence communities, systems, and the future. The Aries rising, Aries rules your first house of self, body, and image. Neptune moving through this house creates a long, strange kind of blessing. Parts of your old identity that once felt solid might begin to blur. You might lose interest in roles that you fought hard once to occupy. At times you might feel less sure of who you are. Allow that to be a process for you. The invitation is to allow a more honest self to emerge, one that's defined by inner resonance. Watch where you feel called to act from compassion instead of competition. Your individual choices about how you show up set the tone for this entire cycle. For Cancer risings, we're looking at your 10th house. Neptune's moving through your realm of career, vocation, and public image. Your old measures of success are beginning to lose their grip. You might feel called towards work that's more aligned with healing, creativity, or service, even if it doesn't match the title that you once imagined or dreamt of. Ask yourself what kind of contribution you want your life to make, and take one concrete step in that direction. Updating your public role is really about updating how you see yourself as leader. For Libra risings, Aries rules your 7th house of partnerships and one-to-one dynamics. Relationships might become less about roles and more about soul. You might find yourself idealizing a partner or feeling that others are projecting onto you. Use this as a mirror. Where are you longing to be met more deeply? Where are your boundaries too soft or too rigid? Over these upcoming years, you are now learning to show up in a relationship as your real self, rather than only the pleasing or the diplomatic version. Have honest conversations about shared visions, and that will matter more than the surface harmony. For Capricorn risings, Aries rules your 4th house of home, family, and roots. Neptune here will be dissolving old family myths and emotional loyalties. You could feel less at home in places that once felt very safe, or more sensitive to the emotional weather and undertones in your house. Instead of clinging to the familiar, ask now, what kind of inner home am I ready to build? You're being asked to become the source of emotional safety that you might have looked for elsewhere. Practical steps like simplifying your living situation or creating one dedicated sanctuary space give your inner shift a clear outer form. For all the cardinal signs, the key is this: you are redesigning the framework of your life from the inside out. Saturn's presence at the conjunction and the ingress, colouring this whole transit, highlights sustained conscious building rather than one dramatic gesture or event. Mars, as the host of Neptune, keeps asking you what specific action will bring your self-image closer to who you know you are. Each aligned movement, however modest, becomes part of a much larger architecture moving through you. And now let's look at the fixed signs. The fixed signs of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. The emphasis is more on the inner structures that you cling to. Fixed energy is used to stabilizing and preserving. Neptune in Aries is asking you to loosen your grip, especially where your attachment has turned into stagnation. Mars in Aquarius in 2026 gives your value shifts a collective, innovative edge. Actions you take to change your priorities can ripple through your circles and communities. For Taurus risings, Aries rules your 12th house of the unconscious, street and hidden patterns. Neptune's move here softens old fears around security and control. There can be a quiet, behind-the-scenes spiritual awakening. Give yourself time alone for inner work. Practices like dream journaling, meditation or therapy can help you now to release stories that have shaped your choices about money and safety. As you act on what you discover, perhaps by saying no to one obligation or yes to one nourishing practice, your outer stability begins to reflect a deep inner trust. For Leo risings, Aries rules your 9th house of beliefs, vision, and long journeys. Stories you've told yourself about what is possible may start to dissolve. You feel drawn to study, travel, or spiritual paths that widen your horizon. This is about letting your worldview grow up. Seek teachers, traditions, and experiences that support your courage and integrity. Each book you read, each course you take, each border you cross in your own mind or in the world shifts how you aim your life. The Scorpio rising, Aries rules your 6th house of work, health, and daily routines. You could feel more sensitive to your work environment or to the energetic tone of your days. Neptune here nudges you to gently adjust habits that drain you. Small rituals of care, hydration, rest, movement, time offline will be more powerful than dramatic overhauls. In service and employment, look for ways to align your efforts with causes and tasks that feel meaningful. Every tiny adjustment in how you treat your body and your time is an act of self-respect. For Aquarius risings, Aries rules your 3rd house of mind, communication, and local environment. Your thinking, your neighborhood, and your patterns of speech become more porous. You might notice more intuition in everyday exchanges or feel the urge to speak in a way that honors your deeper knowing. At the same time, it becomes easier to absorb other people's thoughts and moods. Clear mental hygiene will become important. Limit media that leaves you feeling anxious or numb, and make space for conversations that nourish you. You are quietly rewriting the story that you tell about your life. Across all of the fixed signs, the deeper question now is, what do you truly value? And how does your behavior show it? Old definitions of worth, financial, emotional, social, are ready to evolve. Mars as host reminds you that values live in action. Each choice you make about where to place your time, attention, and energy is a spell that you're casting into your future. Under Neptune in Aries, these spells cast extra charge, especially when Mars is strong. And finally, we'll look at the mutable signs: Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and of course Pisces, where Neptune is leaving. You are the bridge builders of the zodiac. You take the ideas from one realm and make them usable in another. Under this transit, that gift becomes more spiritual and more personal. Because Mars is hosting Neptune in Aries all the way through this transit, and is placed in Aquarius at the 2026 conjunction, the way you think, learn, and adjust can seed new patterns in your communities and networks. For Gemini risings, Aries rules your 11th house of friends, networks, and future visions. Early in the transit, your friendship circles and communities become more fluid. People drift in and out. You may feel drawn to more spiritually minded groups, or find that old social roles no longer fit. Use this as a cue to notice what kind of ally you want to be. Each group you step towards or away from reshapes your social landscape and your sense of belonging. For Virgo risings, Aries rules your 8th house of shared resources, intimacy, and deep emotional exchange. Relationship and money entanglements are your classroom. You may feel drawn to partners or collaborators who awaken your empathy, your healing capacities, or your desire to fix. Neptune here is asking you to weave discernment and compassion together. In practical terms, that can mean having clear agreements around time, money, and energy, while still allowing closeness to soften you. Therapy, deep work, or learning about trauma and nervous system healing can help you act from awareness instead of obligation. For Sagittarius risings, Aries rules your 5th house of creativity, joy, and self-expression. Home, family, and your inner child are dissolving and reforming through the 4th to 5th house flow. And the 5th house is where you take risks with your heart. Let your creativity be the place where you integrate what you feel. Simple practices like a weekly writing session, dancing in your living room, or learning an instrument become ways of reclaiming your own fire. Each time you choose play or art instead of numbing out, you strengthen a new image of yourself. For Pisces risings, Aries rules your 2nd house of money, possessions, and self-worth. As Neptune leaves your 1st house, the fog around who you are personally begins to thin. In its place, questions around value and livelihood step forward. What is enough? What do you truly need? Where have you confused being useful with being valuable? This is a long invitation to align your income, possessions, and spending with your soul. You may feel pulled towards simpler living or towards work that feels more like a calling than a job. Each small step towards financial clarity, making a budget, or cancelling one draining expense, asking for fair pay, affirms a new way of seeing yourself. Across all the mutable signs, remember that your gift is adaptation. You are learning how to let your daily choices, your learning, and your inner practices reflect the person you are becoming. Mars, as the host of Neptune, keeps asking you to embody what you understand. Each conversation, each small habit change, each new question is a way of integrating this transit into your real life and the image you hold of yourself. So let's come back to this conjunction, the 20th of February 2026. We've talked about Neptune bringing longing, imagination, and dissolution. Saturn bringing opposite qualities, definition, responsibility, and time, maturity. When these two meet, there is a testing of dreams. Some fantasies may fall away. Some visions are asked to grow up and mature and take on weight. In Aries, that testing lands in the realm of self. Many people might feel a crisis or a turning point around their identity in the year or two on either side of this conjunction. So we might have already seen it in people around us or felt it ourselves. You might feel pushed into situations where you can't keep the role that you've outgrown. Saturn is asking us, if this is who you say you are, then show it. And Neptune is whispering in our ears or in our minds, if this version of you is only a performance, then let it go. So as I've said before, Saturn is in its fall in Aries. So this usual patience is strained. Saturn isn't acting in its normal way. It has to find a new, a different, a more circuitous route to find a way to express itself. There might be pressure to make decisions quickly about work, relationships, location, or role without all the information. And this is where the discipline side gets personal. Instead of rushing to make a new identity overnight, look at 2026 as the year you commit to a longer path of becoming. You don't have to know the final form, exactly where you're going, but you do need to take those first steps that bring you closer to alignment with what you already know to be true for yourself. Remember Mars's role, that during the conjunction Mars is in Aquarius, co-present with Pluto, the planet that's revealed already in those conjunctions that we had earlier in January, our deepest fears and strengths revealed to us, wanting us to empower ourselves by facing them. In Aquarius, ruled by Saturn, it's connected with groups, technology, and it's future-facing. So these actions that we're taking are not just about our own private lives, but they're plugging into wider systems. Choices about how we use our voices online, how we participate in movements, collective movements, how we're showing up in communities are all parts of the larger pattern that's being set and the collective dream that Neptune is renewing for us, this new collective dream. So this is an excellent moment for us to begin or deepen a discipline that is anchoring our emerging self, what we would like to become. However this looks for you, it might be a daily meditation, weekly creative practice, a different therapy, a physical training routine, something Martian. I always talk about a healthy container for a sign. And with Mars, that movement, that martial action will find an expression one way or another. So if we can think of a way that we'd like that action to move through us, that's a much healthier way than waiting and seeing what shows up, which could be conflict or cutting away of things that we don't want to remove from our lives. So it's healthier to make those choices ahead of time and then make it consistent. That's what Saturn responds to, that regular repetition, that commitment, that sincerity is what Neptune seeks. When you bring those together in a simple, regular practice, you're creating that healthy container where your vision, what you're seeking, what you want Neptune and Saturn in Aries to make for you will take root. And never forget this collective phase. We're likely to see these ideals around independence, leadership, and courage being rewritten in the world around us. Some public figures who have carried certain archetypes of Saturn and Neptune are likely to fade and crumble away, while new ones may appear who embody a different kind of strength, more vulnerable, more honest, spiritually attuned. We've got no control over that part, but we can influence the collective. We can contribute to the collective dream. What would we like to see in our leaders? And we are all part of that collective that can bring that in and seed that. at this conjunction. So we always like to offer some astro mindfulness practices as well, now that we've looked at the theory and the horoscopes and what it might mean for us. And this is a long initiation, so I'm just giving you some simple practical tools. So a short ritual once a month, maybe. Any new moon or when the moon is in Aries once a month. Light a single candle and just sit with it for a few minutes. Steady your breathing, just tuned into your breathing. Steady your body, allow the tension to drain out, and connect with your feet and how they're connecting with the earth. Think about the earth and how your breath is moving through your body. And when you feel settled, just ask yourself, have you been acting against yourself lately, self-sabotaging in any way? And then ask, is there one small action you can take this month that is more aligned, that will fit into who you are now? Then name that action out loud, speak it into the candle, release it with your breath. And in doing this, you're training your system to connect inner truth without a choice. And maybe journal, reflect as the candle burns. When you feel ready, blow it out. Maybe journal after, keep a note of how you self-sabotaged, and also what is the small action you want to take this month, and then review it again at the following month. You might like to ask yourself a reality question. When you're feeling swept up in a story that you're telling yourself, maybe about a relationship, about work or an identity, just pause for a moment and ask yourself, what has actually happened? What are the facts of this situation? And then see if you can separate out, what are you adding to that story? What have you imagined? What are you telling yourself that the other person or people are thinking? What have you decided that they've acted this way because X, Y, and Z, or they think this because I said that? And then remove all of that extra noise around the situation. They might have acted a certain way. You might not agree with it, but you don't know why they acted. You might not know everything that's going on in their lives. So can we remove all the extra around it? Because sometimes it may be something going on in their lives that we've got nothing to do with, absolutely nothing to do with us or our story. It can be two totally separate events. Then look at one concrete step that lies in the actually happened column. Just the facts of what happened, and have the real conversation. And notice the more times you do this, see if you can reduce all the thoughts and the stories that you tell yourself that add, especially if they're adding to the pain of the story. See yourself as an observer of those stories and see if you can start reducing the things that go into the second column, the what actually happened column, and then the what have I added to that story, or what have I imagined column. And then you might want to track Mars hosting Neptune. You don't need to follow every transit, but you might notice when you feel impulsive or aggressive, where is Mars? Notice when those impulsive moves tend to work out. Notice when they don't. Is that linked to when Mars is in dignity and when it's not? When it's retrograde, when it's stationing? This may help us. You might start to see a pattern. Alongside this, you might want to add a steady nervous system practice, maybe a short walk, a breathing sequence, journaling, gentle stretching. Keep it very simple, something you can do consistently, more than intense at the start, which is tempting with all the Mars and Jupiter energy right at the beginning as a transit. But keep it something that you can actually keep going for longer through the transit. Commit to yourself. And each time you return to the practice, think of Neptune in Aries and anchor this transit in your body. Neptune really appreciates that. Give your future self this calm foundation that you can act from. So we're just on this threshold of this new story that's going to run far beyond this moment. The Saturn-Neptune Conjunction begins this cycle that won't complete until their next meeting in 2061. So we're looking at long dates ahead. The collective questions then will be very different. Same as the world that we're living in now is very different to 1989 and to the 1860s and 70s when Neptune was last in Aries. The tone of that future is being written right now. It's a big generational collective shift. The choices that we all make will add to this collective shift and inform the next few years of this transit. So think of yourself as the architect at this foundational stage. The sky will keep asking us different things. The moon will keep moving every month, and we'll have the smaller personal planets making different transits. So there's going to be lots of astrology going on, but these outer planet transits underpin all of that. And I want to recommend some books. I've got Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas is a great book. And you can see I've got lots of tabs there if you want to learn more about the outer planet transits. So Liz Green has written Neptune and the Quest for Redemption, which is another fantastic book on Neptune. So remember that this isn't a single breakthrough moment. It's going to be small daily choices, consistency in showing up, and recognizing that Neptune is one of the hardest planets to identify sometimes because it has that nebulous, porous, mystical kind of nature. But when you can identify him, it's really wonderful. So if you're ready to practice that pause before reacting, you might also want to type witness in the comments as your own reminder to stop and choose instead of running on autopilot, and share your Neptune and Aries stories from last year when it ingressed. And just to remind you that this video is the first in a new series from Asteri Sofia Kairos. Throughout 2026, we're going to be offering more of these every month, timeless, evergreen content from all of our astrologers, offering you this roadmap that's going to take you through, teaching you more about transits, interpreting them, and how they're working so you can return to them and navigate for yourself your way through the planetary movements in the sky. You can find me on Substack at Celestia Astrology. My name is Sonia. And you can also find Asteri Sofia Kairos on Substack and on YouTube. And we are so grateful if you would like, subscribe, and comment. We do this work. We don't get paid for it. It's just for the love of astrology. But you can show your support, financial or otherwise, by subscribing, by upgrading to paid. If you do upgrade to paid, we do have a eclipse workshops. The one coming up for the Aquarius season will be free to all our paid subscribers. And other workshops, quite often, there's a substantial discount for paying subscribers. So you can support us in that way. But otherwise, just enjoy. And do let us know how it lands for you. We do appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching.